Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to this Cloud Native Now Roundtable. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. We have an exciting panel ahead, but before we get things rolling, I have a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review with everyone. First off, we are recording today's session. So if you have to step away, if you'd like to rewatch, or if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the on-demand recording shortly after we conclude this live session today. Now, if you want to engage with our panelists, there's a couple of ways for you to do so. The first and the easiest option is the chat tab. So if you see that chat tab on the right side of your screen, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you are joining us today. If you have any specific questions, we do want you to send those questions to the Q&A panel. Sending those to the Q&A just helps us keep track, and we want to do our best to answer as many of your questions as we can. So send them in as soon as you get them, and we'll do our best to hit on them. Additionally, if you check out the handout section, we have a couple of resources there for you, so feel free to grab those. And before we close things out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around till the very end to see if you're one of our lucky winners. Our topic today is container Kubernetes management, and our panelists today are Angel Camacho, Product Marketing Director at Redis. We have Joe Dahlquist, VP of Product Marketing at Weaveworks, and keeping this train on the tracks is our very own Sharon Florentine, Managing Editor at Techstrong Group. So Angel and Joe, thank you both so much for joining us today. Sharon, do you want to go ahead and get this conversation rolling?
I would love to. As far as keeping the train on the tracks, we'll see. But again, Angel, Joe, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. To the audience, super excited to see you all here, checking in from all over the world. And all right, so I'm going to start off with what seems like a simple question on its face, but probably isn't. What is driving the increased adoption of Kubernetes that we're seeing everywhere from, cloud to edge to pretty much everywhere? What is driving that? Joe, you're nodding. You want to kick us off?
Thanks, Sharon. And thanks, Cody. And pleasure to be with you, Angel. Geez, I think there's a lot of things that are driving today's wild Kubernetes adoption. It looks, if you look at companies over the last 10 years, it started with, what is Kubernetes? How do we do this cloud thing? Are we moving to the cloud? Let's take baby steps. We'll try hybrid first. But, fast forward to 2023, I think there's a handful of things that are driving Kubernetes adoption and uptake. First and foremost, I think the promise of what you get in terms of ROI by moving to containerized applications, by moving to standardization, where Kubernetes offers an ability to abstract a lot of the complexities. And granted, I think everybody that's probably listening in right now says, well, Kubernetes is pretty complex itself. Yeah, absolutely it is, right? Like I don't know that it's ever not going to be. I think that that's just a reality. Some realities that coincide with it, every company is a software company these days, right? The companies that you've done business with for 20, 30 years have apps now, right? And they want you to install them on your smart devices and interact with their brand, interact with their services, with their products through that. The cloud is a thing. It's arrived, right? And most software companies now have some kind of cloud footprint, whether that's with one of the big hyperscalers like AWS or Microsoft or Google, or whether it's a private cloud or some kind of hybridization solution where there's some on-prem, there's some data center, there's some public cloud footprint. And being able to succeed in rapidly deploying new software that helps you be competitive, that delights your customers, requires that you are able to operate your software in all of these environments concurrently. And I think Kubernetes provides a pathway to being able to do that, that other technologies just haven't been able to do in the past. So, the world is changing, it's moving faster. Companies are deploying software hundreds of times a day, not once a month. And it's because there's an expectation that bugs get fixed quickly, new features get delivered quickly, and that's how companies stay innovative and on the cutting edge and competitive. And so I think that's driving a lot of the Kubernetes adoption. What do you think, Anil?
Yeah, thank you very much. So let me pile up on what you are saying, and thank you very much for having us. This is a great place to start a conversation like this. I guess I'll try to summarize what you've been saying, because I agree with your vision. Kubernetes is not simple. However, what I heard from our customers, or when I go to events, one of the biggest things that I hear is about flexibility. And I think that this is what Kubernetes brings to the table: the flexibility, the ability to do many different things. Because yes, that is right. Everybody now is a software company. They want to deploy in whatever they want, closer to their customers, in mobile applications. And monolithic applications do not provide means for doing it. So Kubernetes allows you to be flexible, to reduce the amount of app that you need, mainly, for example, for scalability. And then it helps you bring new deployment patterns to your applications, like, for example, microservices. That's one of the biggest drivers. So that, I believe, with what Joe is saying, I believe that the flexibility to be agnostic of your infrastructure, being really a software company, is what is driving the adoption most of the time.
Yeah.
And it is not mandated, right? It just happens organically.
Yeah. And you know what? I think the other thing that's not mandated, not every software solution needs to be broken up into services and containerized, right? There's nothing wrong with monolithic apps.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I think they work great, and they can still benefit from a lot of the new kind of wave of cloud native technologies, approaches, patterns. But scalability, cost control, the ability to rapidly fix issues when they present themselves, being able to, apply security and compliance controls to microservices is surely a lot easier than trying to do it with some big monolithic app. And so I think that there's, the whole world doesn't have to adopt Kubernetes, but for organizations that need that scalability, that need that trust and that confidence that comes from regulatory pressure, from security pressure, Kubernetes has a lot of promises there that you just otherwise have to work much harder for, and in silos, as opposed to the way that Kubernetes lets you address some of those challenges. So
right.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's a great point. And one of the publications that I manage is Cloud Native Now, and there's great discussions that we've had around, can you be cloud native without being in the cloud? Can you adopt, kind of the mindset of containerization and cloud native without, going whole hog onto that thing? And I think that, your points absolutely addresses that, like, yeah, you can take advantage of some of that without, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You can absolutely be cloud native and not have a single cluster in your estate, right? Like I think I do agree with that. I think it is a mindset. It's a pattern that works across the board for lots of things, and it's a natural extension of this DevOps movement that started more than 15 years ago. It kind of is a natural evolutionary step of that, I think. And so is things like GitOps and the ability to apply automation where automation makes sense, right? I think, that's the other promise of Kubernetes, is that it creates some boundaries and some lines of responsibility that help reduce some of the friction that we ran into when trying to become DevOps operations, right? Who's responsible for running this app that we built? Who's responsible when it breaks? And who's going to go and fix it? And, who on our team knows how to work with Kubernetes, right? We're all Java developers. We don't know how that stuff works. So it's great, but yeah, it's disruptive too. And it's a challenge, and it requires that people learn new things and touch new tooling. And that's always a challenge, right? Change
but
management.
Let me add on top of that, because you bring in a good points, and linking to something that Sharon, you were saying, is that you can be cloud native without being in the cloud. You can be, because cloud native is not only being in one of the three hyperscalers, right? It's not just to be able to deploy there. And I'm talking this because Redis is like Switzerland, right? We are a data platform that can be deployed on-prem, in the cloud, hybrid, multi-cloud, whatever you want. And Kubernetes is a perfect vehicle for doing that. So now we have a lot of customers who have deployments in the cloud, and they have still deployments on-prem. How do you reconcile your data platform? Mainly in today's age, where real time is the norm, latency kills your applications. And if you are not getting the service on your application, by the time you click a button on your phone, you switch to the next application. And that's how fast change is coming. So with Redis, we provide that real-time data platform in any of these infrastructures that you want. And now that the infrastructure can be handled as software, developers have more power than before, right? So you can start plugging and building in a small scale on-prem, deploying in the cloud. And with Redis, we guarantee that the same features that you have on-prem, you will have them in the cloud. And now, as Joe was saying, now it's becoming complex, because now you need to manage different things. And in this case, Kubernetes is the glue that keeps us together.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think Kubernetes one of the big benefits of Kubernetes is, if I put myself in the shoes of a customer, right? I want the best features, best capabilities. I want it now. I want it to work right. I don't want bugs. I don't want problems. I don't want friction. I want my software. I want it now, and I want it the way that I want it, right? If I'm a developer, I want to deliver that software as rapidly as possible. I want my bug fixes that I just finished. I want those in the hands of my customer immediately, right? Time to deploy is something I think you and I have both worked with engineers probably most of our professional careers, right? Nothing delights a developer more than their new feature or their fix getting into the hands of customers, getting into production as quickly as possible. And it just so happens that that absolutely delights the customers as well, right? It works on both ends of the spectrum. And Kubernetes is a delivery vehicle that can make that happen. And if you bubble that up to the business benefits, right? That's how companies are competitive. That's how they stay on the leading edge. That's how they bring value to market faster than their competitors. It's how they make their customers happier than they've ever been able to do it. And so I think that Kubernetes, is like the warp speed button for software application and application development and release cycles. And, nothing's going to dethrone it in the near future. I think, the score is settled there.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, because, we've talked about how and the why and the kind of the evolution here. But, there are so many organizations that have deployed Kubernetes, they're using it, and now they have this huge, increasingly growing number of clusters out there. And so this is kind of burying the lead a little bit, right? This is what we're talking about in this webinar, is container Kubernetes management. So how can organizations approach managing all of these clusters, like best practices kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I'm sure that Joe and I may have competing views. I don't know, maybe it's complementary views out of these, because as I was saying, at Redis, we proud of ourselves of being a kind of Switzerland for infrastructure. But that brings new responsibility, because you need to manage larger and larger clusters depending on the amount of data that you're handling, depending on where you are deploying. Are you deploying at the edge? Are you deploying in the cloud? Are you deploying hybrid? Things like that. So in the case of Redis, what we provide is a Kubernetes operator. That's a wrapper around our Kubernetes offering, So you can use it as software, right? You point to it. You use APIs to manage your system. You can use CLI. You can do a lot of things, right? But the good thing is that we are providing that. It's a tool to help managing the deployment of large infrastructures. Like, for example, our latest version of the operator, it's only a 3 lines in a YAML file, a definition file, where you can just write the deployment. What do you want to deploy? You run this configuration file, and you build an active cluster across the cloud, right? Instead of doing it manually. Yes, in the early days, and Joe may remember this, you needed a PhD to be able to manage and deploy Kubernetes. I was in the early days of virtualization, working with early versions of containers at Sun Microsystems. Seeing the evolution where we are is beautiful. I mean, literally, I was sitting with an engineer the other day, 3 lines on the YAML file. We deploy an active cluster across 2 different clouds. It's like, wow, beautiful, right? And now then, same thing to deploy the database, not only the cluster, the database. And you deploy the entry points, and it's beautiful. You handle that, and developers can do it via software. They don't need to bother. They are part of the DevOps. They don't need to bother an administrator to deploy all these. They become part of the cycle, and there's a lot of responsibility with that. So we are providing those tools. That is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is, of course, if you don't want to manage your own infrastructure, you can always rent a Kubernetes platform as a service, right, with hyperscalers. And but then you have to bring in additional vendors with all that complexity. And I'm sure that here's where Joe has some thoughts about how it can be done, right?
I think the thing that I found a little bit funny and interesting in what she said, like, let's rewind, right? Who in kindergarten, by show of hands in the chat or something, maybe said, I want to grow up to be a Kubernetes administrator, right? Like, everyone.
I think those people are like 7 years old now.
And is that a skill, or is that a curse, right? Are you the one person at app dev team that knows how to work Kubernetes, and you are forever the DevOps person? It's I think that software, I think that one of the driving forces, one of the things that makes it challenging is, what's the developer experience when you have to run the software that you build, right? Is it a good experience, or is it a hair-pulling, maniacal experience that you don't want to have to do very frequently? I think the answer to that depends on the tools, the patterns, the approach, obviously the chemistry of the team that you're working in. Developers want to build awesome apps, right? They want to write code. They want that product that they build to get used by people, and for it to make their lives better and enrich their experiences. They don't want to necessarily understand the innate requirements of spinning up a cluster, or doing some testing in some ephemeral environment. They want to know, is my app running? Is it in production? What version? What's the status? And they want a big green button that says spin up a Kubernetes cluster, right? They don't want to have to deal with the complexities and the challenges of policy or compliance. They don't necessarily want to have to track manually in a spreadsheet who owns the services that they need and the components that they need to be able to build their applications. And so one of the things that Weaveworks does is tries to abstract those complexities and make them disappear for application development teams, right? Give me a big shiny button that I can press that allows me to create a cluster, so that I don't have to put in an ops ticket, so that I don't have to wait a week for that environment to be ready for me to start working on a new project. Being able to create that self-service is wonderful, but it's also hard, right? And I think that to me, what's very central to the challenges that companies face when trying to manage Kubernetes, especially at scale, is standardization. How do we do this in kind of a repeatable, safe, secure, and compliant method that's also optimized for cost, that follows best practices of my organization. And I think that that can be automated and that can be built into platforms like what Weaveworks has created, where net development teams get to spend more of their day-to-day time writing code and building applications that is a part of the value stream for those organizations that they work for, right? Running it, maintaining it, creating golden paths and guardrails, those things are absolutely necessary to create a developer experience that makes them want to continue working for that company on that project, delighting customers with the things that they're building.
Yeah. A participant had an interesting question, and I feel like it kind of got answered over the last couple minutes, but they were asking about how to address some of the complexities that come up with adopting Kubernetes: resource consumption, cost optimization, backup. And I think you guys kind of covered that a little bit, but anything additional you want to add to that to answer that?
Probably the only thing that I can add is that the advantage of the operators.
Mm-hmm.
The operators is the piece of software that provides consistency for delivery. I mean, you can also use Helm charts, and I'm getting nerdy in the conversation, but you can use all those to provide a repeatable experience, scalable experience for your DevOps team. And I also saw in the chat one question that was saying that developer expectations can vary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things, depending on the size of your organization, the stage of adoption of your in your company, right? Usually, these projects start small, and as they scale rapidly. And in the same way, as Joe was saying, your compliance, your regulations, they also need to be in sight. So what the operators and Helm management provides is that repeatable environment that is auditable, because there's a trace on what you've been doing, right? And of course, now there's more technology to keep observability inside of the Kubernetes and containerized applications, like, for example, using Prometheus. And then you can do a beautiful dashboard with Grafana. And now you have a complete visibility of what used to be little black boxes. Now you have complete visibility into what they are doing, the performance, and you can have all these metrics. And now, as you can see, now you have a dashboard to present to your management or for keep an eye on the operations. So it's becoming a little bit more complicated, but at the same time, it becomes more regulated and more observable and more repeatable and more scalable. So all these tools are adding on top of that for the pieces that in the beginning, it was like a little black box and people would say, I don't know what's going on in there. But now you have a direct eye on them and you can satisfy developers, but also administrators. And again, it depends on the stage of adoption in your company. Some companies, they have full dedicated Kubernetes organizations. Some others, the developer is the DevOps person and it's the administrator of the infrastructure because it's a software-only company.
That's great. And you know what I love about modern approaches to this that include things like, developer portals and platform engineering approaches to this is you don't have to drown everybody in visibility, right? Like not everybody needs to see everything. I think you can kind of customize the experience based on who the individual is, who the team is, and they don't have to deal with the cognitive load that comes from oversharing or seeing too much and having too many tools in their toolkit. So I like also that we've evolved Kubernetes management now to the point where different teams and different individuals can have a different experience with the tool chains, with what they're able to do, what they're able to see, what they have access to. And you're able to kind of hide some of that complexity, or at least get it out from underneath the feet of people that are trying to move quickly and be agile in this new world.
Yeah. great points. And I think, so, well, okay, sorry. I got so many thoughts. I want to go back to something Angel mentioned a couple minutes ago when you were talking about where Kubernetes was deployed, edge, cloud, on-prem, that kind of thing. So are there different management considerations that you need to think about depending on where it's deployed, and what are those, and how do you identify them, and then how do you address those?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because I was coming from a different angle, right?
Okay.
On what did you get by deploying in different ways, not the tool. Let me first elaborate on what I was saying, because I was having a similar conversation a few days ago with a customer, and they were struggling at deciding where they wanted to deploy the cluster. Okay, and of course we had a conversation about the available tools, the operators that they had developed some strategies, and the next level of question was like, okay, do I deploy on-prem? Do I need to have cloud, multi-cloud, all those kind of things? And they were concerned that every different infrastructures will require different kind of maintenance for their Kubernetes cluster. So I came back to the Kubernetes operator, right? I said, hey, don't worry, you can deploy whatever makes sense for your customers. Where are your own clients, your own users? You have a mobile application. You don't know where they are. You know that most of your business is done in the East Coast of the US, but you also have operations in Europe. So let's try and deploy an active cluster. You put certain amount of computing power on the East Coast and certain amount of computing power in Europe. But now you have a database that talks underneath, and they have data that belongs to both sides. So you don't need to sacrifice the performance of your application, having everything in just one single place. The European customers, they receive immediate updates on their applications, similar to your US-based customers. Yes, if your customers are roaming around the world, they may see a little bit of delay, but you can also deploy additional clusters in there. Now, this is made possible with Kubernetes. If you want to go and deploy on a traditional way, it's very difficult to go and deploy another cluster for a database and then your applications, because we have to remind ourselves, this is not only about the data platform, it's also about the application and the additional tools. We at Redis, we provide an important layer, yes, the real-time data platform. But on top of it, you need to think about all the considerations and all the benefits that, in this case, it was a microservice deployment pattern, can help for your own cluster, for your own clients. So going back to the original question is, how do you deploy? I said, okay, go and use the operator. Make sure that you have similar capabilities for the rest of your software stack. Make it resonate, and don't worry about the geographical location. That Redis has that covered for you, right? You can have the data platform. Now, we do not provide other higher level management tools. We provide an operator, right? So you manage the data platform. And this is what I'm sure that Joe can complement the answer, because this is about the entire deployment option, not only just the data layer.
Yeah. Ask somebody who is very well versed in EKS to go spin up a Kubernetes cluster in GKE, right? And it can be a different world. The hyperscalers have, rather minimal offerings when it comes to being able to work with Kubernetes. And that's a good thing, right? Because it allows lots of companies like Weaveworks and like Redis to be able to provide solutions to companies that are facing different challenges. I know that the approach we take is that there should be a rather unified experience for application teams to be able to build and then run their applications regardless of flavor of Kubernetes that they're going to run it in, right? Multi-cloud used to be this dreamy thing where I think it was driven by things like, well, what if my cloud goes down, right? What's my fallback, right? It really started off as like a resiliency and reliability solution, but it's come so far in the last few years. Now it's about cost optimization. Like, hey, on what day of the week and what hour of the day, where should I be running my applications? Where should I put my workloads? And, is it cost optimized? Is it safe? Is it secure? We have customers that will run applications in every environment, from air-gapped on-prem Kubernetes using something like EKS Anywhere to, right, like really unique flavors from a Tanzu or a OpenShift or you name it, right? Like, I think that Kubernetes has become a bit of a skeleton key that unlocks all of the doors. And I think there is an expectation now that you should be able to run your apps anywhere and everywhere, and that the experience shouldn't vary much from one to the other, right? That's kind of a layer of abstraction that's very good for teams, because it gives them a lot of options to control things that used to be uncontrollable. So yeah, I think, regardless of flavor, you want a unified experience. I think that being able to remove some of those questions, those challenges, that complexity just makes everybody's life a little bit easier. And yet you don't have to lose the control. You don't have to lose the visibility. You just need different things under the hood to be able to work with those different environments all concurrently, right? And that's a challenge to do, but hey, we build great software, and you guys build great software that helps companies address some of these challenges.
Yeah. So what pitfalls should folks avoid with Kubernetes management? What are the big pitfalls?
Wow. How much time we have?
Yeah.
We still have about a half an hour, so go nuts.
Oh, okay.
We got plenty of time.
No, I'm kidding. I mean, I'm sure that Joe will sympathize with this idea. Kubernetes is a liberating technology, but it can also be a golden cage. Okay, it's a liberating technology because it allows you to build things that you were not able to build before, with a scalability, performance, geo distribution, all those kind of things, to make compartmentalize little aspects of your application, or make them as big as you need it, right? So for me, that's liberating. When you do not have the governance, is when it becomes a nightmare. Okay, I think that that's when you become trapped in a golden cage, because you are like, hey, we have the microservices, or we have the best containers ever, we have the best infrastructure deployment ever. So for me, and in my experience, there's two main components that help you avoid pitfalls. One is a clear, defined strategy and skillful tacticians. Okay, and in this case, as Joe were saying, nobody woke up 20 years ago saying, hey, my future is to be a Kubernetes operator, right? It just happened on us. And the strategy needs to be set in conjunction with architects, with infrastructure people, but also to be compatible with the companies trying to offer and trying to build. And this is sometimes difficult, because technology advances way faster than corporate strategy. So now you have to influence both. So that's the strategy level. Sometimes it's a CXO level strategy, but guess what? Us, the geeks, we have the keys. So we can have a lot of sway. We can have a lot of swagger here. Say, hey, this is how we want to build a strategy and influence corporate strategy. That's one point. The other point is having great tacticians. And what I mean is, you don't need to be the super expert on Kubernetes, but you need to know what is your 911. You need to know who to call and say, hey, I'm struggling here. I need help. Let's go and build something. For us, I mean, again, I'm going back to Redis, of course, it's not only about having the operator, but it's having a great team of professional services to help you build whatever you want, do a transfer of information, and help those tacticians become part of the strategy building in each company. So to go back to your original question, what are the pitfalls? Is avoid the anarchy, because when you get more freedom, at some point it turns into anarchy. So we need freedom within a good framework that allows you and empowers everybody in the company. And you need good tacticians to keep moving forward. You can have the best strategy, but if you don't have a Messi in your team, your soccer team flounders, right? For those who like soccer, sorry, yes, I'm a soccer person. We can do an analogy with other sports anyway. But the point here is a strategy, solid strategy, and solid skills. For me, that's the two main pitfalls that you need to address.
Yeah, I think I'm going to make T-shirts now that say "Golden Paths, not Golden Cages." Right? Like, I'll sell them to the 7 people that want to buy those T-shirts and buy a retirement home near the beach. Yeah, look, pitfalls. There's tons. Don't adopt Kubernetes because, right? Adopt it for a reason. Like, have some goals. Have it align with corporate strategy, with business strategy. I think that there's a lot of companies for whom digital modernization, digital transformation is a buzzword, and they're not prepared to walk the walk, but they're certainly eager to talk the talk. And that can lead to some real problems. First, that comes to mind is skill gaps, right? You don't just stroll into cloud native and Kubernetes without having some skilled technicians, without having the skills, the capabilities, the knowledge, the previous experience. Otherwise, you will find that you stop building applications and pushing out great updates to your customers because you're fussing with infrastructure. I think, skill gaps can certainly be bridged over with some commercial software and occasionally some open source software as well. Like, you can find things that fill in the divots and the potholes and make the experience a little bit smoother for DevOps, but it's not something that you just do overnight. And I've seen companies struggle years and months later after deciding to move towards Kubernetes. And, when you ask them to reflect on that decision making, they maybe didn't have a real strong driving force behind adopting this technology shift and this modernization project, other than all the cool kids at the lunch table are doing Kubernetes now, right? Is it the right move for you and your organization? I mean, if you are a company that does not have previous experience with cloud native patterns, with the vast landscape of CNCF projects and tool chains that exist to do it, it's a lot to bite off and chew. And you should probably find some talent that has some previous experience there that can act as a Sherpa to lead you into the mountains there and help you not regret it later, or tie up all of your expensive and vital resources dealing with the mechanics of that, when it should be a solution that helps you do all of those things faster. Other pitfalls that come to mind, speaking of open source, look, Weaveworks is deeply committed to open source software, and developers by nature are builders, right? They want to tinker, they want to work with stuff, they want to, they want to see what's possible. And it's easy to grab a shovel and start digging when it comes to open source software and those tools, right? And you dig and you dig and you dig. And sometimes I think after digging, you look up and you realize that you are in a deep pit surrounded by walls and no ladders. And so I think it's really easy for companies to embrace the beauty of getting a lot of open source software to work together by just adding a little bit of customization and a few scripts here and there, and it'll all be beautiful and we won't have to spend a dime. But the reality is that, that way lies danger. And companies that are running Kubernetes in production need to be able to rely on experts, need to be able to rely on companies that build software for running Kubernetes in production at scale, securely, safely, in trusted ways. And I think that there needs to be a balance between both the open source tools that companies adopt and a willingness to invest in companies that can make those challenges minimal and de-risk some of the pitfalls that they might run into. So, not I always advocate that, there should be support for and use for all of the great open source stuff that's out there. Don't be afraid, to take the message up the ladder to senior management that, we can solve some of the pitfalls and we can de-risk some of the risks by looking at some commercial off-the-shelf software too. There's companies out there like Weaveworks that are building fantastic solutions for it.
That's a very interesting point, the one that you make, and also based on some of the chat that the participants are having. And I want to bring this to the table. I think it's a perfect segue to talk about another elephant in the room that sometimes we do not address until it's too late. You already touched on it about the open source, right? I mean, Redis is big proponent of open source. You know that. But there's moments in your strategy and in your tactics where you must decide what is better, build or buy. And actually, we have a series of video interviews in redis.com that you can go and search for it. It's a series of build versus buy. Why is that? Because in some cases, it makes more sense to build your own observability and dashboards with Prometheus and Grafana. And as somebody was saying in the chat, it's like, but yeah, you can now use software as a service and bring Datadog, right? And that is beautiful if you have to have options. That's the best thing. Now, and this may be a commercial for Weaveworks. That's one of the biggest assets that you have the options. You can have open source, and you can incorporate that in a single offering. Now, the other thing that people need to consider is, do you want to become a software maintainer on top of your business? Or because if you are going to be plugging all these open source projects, you need to become a maintainer of those. Otherwise, you're going to be falling behind on features. You're going to be falling behind on scalability. You may bring in new risks. But if it's already built for you, then you can buy it with confidence, and somebody else maybe is using the economies of scale to bring it at a better price point, saving cost, and is responsible for the security compliance regulations that you need from that part of your software. That may be an additional pitfall to avoid, because it's part of the strategy, it's part of the tactics. Balance your buy versus build. And again, Redis has a big component of open source, but I'm a true believer that the economies of scale of the companies where we put a software as a service, or in this case, Kubernetes or other offerings on the table, is when enterprises benefits the most.
And there was a comment too in the chat that brought up healthcare, and that highly regulated industries, which is what we call them here, that kind of thing can also steer your decision, right? Maybe you're not permitted to use open source to a certain extent, or you have to, bring in tools, platforms that will allow you to be in compliance with the regulations that you need to follow in your industry, et cetera, et cetera. So,
yeah. It's a lot to bite off and chew for highly regulated industries. I don't envy the folks that have to think about not only the customer and competitors and the business goals, but also regulatory and compliance pressures, whether it's something simple like GDPR, simple, or, whether, or whether it is, localization, or whether it's, things that come down from the Treasury Department in terms of, compliance and regulatory things that touch on security and information privacy. It's a messy world out there. And I think we've seen a couple of comments that have come up here in the chat that, are cautionary statements, that, it's a slippery slope, and you can find yourself in the midst of complexity like you've never dreamed of before when it comes to some of these highly regulated environments and the complicated process of a software development lifecycle.
It's true also because in open source, not everybody is going to pay for the certification on ISO, for example, or PCI compliance. Who's going to pay that? The community? Who's going to run it? Who's going to be the project manager? Because most of these certifications, most of these regulations, when you are going to audit them, takes months, probably in some cases even years. So, for example, Redis Enterprise offers you all these regulations, all this compliance with all these seals of approvals from official entities that, unfortunately, the Redis community is not going to be able to run those exercises against the open source version of it, right? So that's the other thing that you need to think about it. Yes, you can build with Redis open source, and of course, you can build your entire solution, but then you are responsible for the certification of the entire solution. And you have to check all these boxes that regulators will look into it. Now, with other projects, or when you bring another company that is responsible for that part, instead of having gazillion checkboxes, you have one. Your data platform is certified. Click, check. Now, and this is the complexity that I was talking about, that Joe just brought up with these regulations. So keep an eye on that. There's value at it. Do you want to do it yourself? You can do it. That's the beauty of having options. You don't have time? Yes, go and get somebody who already has the seal of approval, and you'll be your time to market will be faster. It's very simple. When you are at a certain stage, you have more time to go to market. In some other cases, you don't have that luxury. You need it rapid, so you need to invest. So it's again a balancing act.
Yeah, there's I think modern technology, right, is all about return on investment, right? If I buy this, what do I get? If I invest in this, what's my return? How quickly am I going to get a return on my investment? And is it going to outsize the investment that I make, right? And I can't think of a single piece of software that probably has a higher return on investment than commercial solutions that solve these pitfalls and these challenges for running Kubernetes at scale safely and securely. It's a magic wand that allows people to do their day jobs and do the things that they're good at and that they love doing, and focus their time and energy on those things, instead of what we've been talking about, which is, getting mangled by the infrastructure concerns, by the regulatory concerns. I think we laughed a minute ago about nobody grew up wanting to be, a Kubernetes operator. Nobody, grew up wanting to have to deal with all of the complexities as a full-time job instead of building great apps, right? Which is what I think these organizations really want to focus their time, their energy, and some of their most vital resources on in terms of app dev teams, right? Like, we've seen statistics that developers don't seem to be growing on trees these days, certainly not ones that are prepared for the cloud native reality that we're in. And so attracting and keeping those resources is top of mind for technology companies these days, right? You have organizations that have been hoarding some of these resources over the last few years, and it's created, security and cloud native developers are hot commodities, and the people with these skills can go and work at any company of their choosing. So creating an environment that is welcoming to them, that helps them have a great experience, and that helps them do the things that they want to do in their life and in their career, is important. It's a part of how you're going to keep the great talent that you've worked so hard to attract, right? No different than keeping the customers that you've worked so hard to attain. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that is a pretty darn good place for us to kind of wrap this up here for now. Joe and Angel, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. This has been awesome. To the audience, thank you for all of your amazing questions. We appreciate it. We love to see it. And I believe now Cody is going to join us because he has some final housekeeping notes for everyone.
Thank you for that, Sharon. And Joe, Angel, thank you both so much for joining us on Techstrong Learning today.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Of course. So I would like to remind everyone that our session today was recorded. So if you'd like to rewatch, if you'd like to share with a friend, you will be receiving that email with access to rewatch shortly after we conclude this. You can also find it living on the Cloud Native Now website. So just visit cloudnativenow.com/webinars, and you'll find it living in the on-demand section. I did mention we'd be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So our winners are Hiram S., Dennis C., Jesse T., and Adrian T. So congratulations to our 4 winners. I'll be reaching out to you shortly to get this gift card distributed to you. If you don't find an email from me soon, check your spam folder just in case it happens to be filtered out. I'd like to thank Sharon, Angel, and Joe for leading our conversation today. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm going to post in the chat a quick link to our survey, and we'd love to have you fill that out for us. Also, if you just stick around with us through closing, you will be funneled into that page. So please let us know your thoughts about today's program or recommendations for future topics. We would love to hear from you. Either way, we hope to see you at a future Techstrong Learning experience. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.